if between now and when those hawks are ready to be delivered, nothing's worked, then at that final moment I will be prepared to disarm them.
The only thing I can do to stop this deal is to actually disarm these planes myself.
I would want to transform that plane into something positive and creative that could be put to good use.
I intend to disarm the Hawk warplanes that are going to Indonesia, and I'm going to hammer on them with this hammer, and I hope that that will inspire other people to do further non-violent direct action against the Hawk deal so that we can stop it together.
Hello everyone, you've just heard the voices of Angie Zelter, Andrea Needham, Joe Wilson and Lotta Cronlid. In 1996, the latter three of these ladies broke into British Aerospace's Warton Aerodrome and inflicted anywhere between 1.4 and 2.5 million pounds worth of damage to a Hawk military jet. Angie Zelter would later be arrested with them as part of the conspiracy. The plane was one of 24 due to be delivered to the Indonesian dictatorship of General Suharto. After coming to power in a CIA-backed coup in the 1960s, one in which 500,000 Indonesians were killed, Suharto proceeded to invade and occupy East Timor. During the 25-year occupation, the Indonesian military killed approximately 200,000 people, around one-third of the entire population. The journalist John Pilger produced a documentary film, Death of a Nation, about the genocide.
When the Indonesians landed here, they began an operation that has been compared in its savagery with Pol Pot's takeover of Cambodia. Hundreds of people were gunned down in the streets, in schools, in shops, in their homes, in the hospital. Live grenades were thrown into houses. Women and girls were raped in front of their families. The Indonesian troops had been told that the East Timorese were communists and primitives who threatened the very existence of Indonesia itself. The strategy was clearly to terrorize an entire nation.
It was during this time that the British government was providing export licenses to Indonesia, claiming that the Hawks were not being used in East Timor. Archie Hamilton, the Armed Forces Minister, said in Parliament,
The point of selling Hawk aircraft to Indonesia is to give jobs to people in this country. And there is no doubt in my mind that there is nothing that a Hawk aircraft can do to suppress the people in East Timor. It is not an aircraft that is suitable for that purpose, and we have guarantees from the Indonesians that they would not be used for internal suppression.
John Pilger discussed the likelihood of this in his documentary Flying the Flag, about the British arms industry. He interviewed Mark Higson, who worked on the Iraq desk at the British Foreign Office.
According to Amnesty International, few regimes are so casual about mass murder as the Suharto military dictatorship in Indonesia. Britain is Indonesia's biggest arms supplier, selling them almost everything from Rapier missiles to Hawk fighter aircraft. Following our film Death of a Nation about East Timor, where 200,000 people have died under Indonesia's military occupation, thousands of people wrote to their MPs and to the government to voice their concern. Some of them got these replies from the Foreign Office, replies that are models of deception. For example, the Foreign Office claim Indonesia's Hawks are only trainers. But new evidence has come to light that the principal function of the Hawks is counterinsurgency, identified here as COIN. In other words, their main use is attacking the people of East Timor.
The same kind of letters about Hawk aircraft to Indonesia and saying that they had no military usage would have been sent over different items to Iraq, and more to the point, to virtually any country you want to name. Everyone knows that the Hawk aircraft can be utilized in an offensive way.
And when the Foreign Office writes to people saying they have assurances from, in this case, the Suharto regime, that the Hawks will not and are not being used in East Timor. How do those assurances compare with other assurances that you would have had direct knowledge of?
They're about as worthless as a piece of paper that they're written on. People need to be well aware that at times they are being lied to.
The four ladies involved in the sabotage belonged to Seeds of Hope East Timor Ploughshares, a direct action group inspired by the biblical injunction to beat swords into plowshares. In addition to inflicting damage, they plastered the Hawk with photographs of the victims of the 1991 San Cruz massacre, as well as leaving confession tapes containing video footage of the atrocity. Jose Ramos Horta, the exiled spokesman for the East Timorese resistance, and later Nobel Prize winner and president, wrote to the women that, quote, "In 20 years of resistance, we were never able to shoot down an aircraft. You did it without even firing a single shot, and without hurting the pilot. Keep up your courage. A big hug to you all." End quote. I recently recalled reading about this incident in John Pilger's book, Hidden Agendas. It was whilst I was interviewing James Boswell about his documenting of Palestine protesters being detained under anti-terrorism legislation. We were specifically discussing the group now known as the Filton 18. In August 2024, 6 people broke into Elbit Systems' manufacturing plant in Filton, Bristol. They proceeded to dismantle weapons bound for Israel, allegedly doing over £1 million worth of damage. 4 more, allegedly connected people were immediately detained by armed counter-terrorist police, with a further 8 being raided and remanded in November. We can hear Sukaina Rajwani, the mother of one of the group of 6, Fatima Zainab Rajwani, discussing her daughter's motivation.
Fatima Zainab has always been very passionate about social justice. Even before the war in Gaza started, she's been advocating for injustices around the world, whether it's Sudan, Congo, Kashmir, just to name a few. She always says that, if you ever wonder what you would have done during the slave trade or apartheid South Africa or the Holocaust, then that's exactly what you're doing right now in the present day during a live stream genocide.
In the same interview, conducted by Owen Jones, Claire Rogers, the mother of activist Zoe Rogers, explains what Elbit Systems does.
I had never heard of Elbit Systems until Zoe dragged me into this kicking and screaming. And I'm just, sickened isn't a strong enough word for the fact that our country is hosting Israel's biggest arms manufacturer and even giving them contracts to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of pounds since they've been based here. If people knew that, what would they do? People need to know that these deadly weapons, these drones, which are just diabolical, are being made here, and they are being sent to Gaza. I mean, it was very clear that the quadcopter drones that the 10 found in Filton were the same that are used in Gaza. It's diabolical, and people need to know, and they need to raise their voices about that. The way I see it is that Elbit, having grasped what Elbit is, I see it as this huge monster with tentacles, and it's sort of bloated on the blood of innocent people. And I see our children like going in with sticks and poking it because no one else will do that. No one else is brave enough.
Both mothers then talk about the use of the Anti-Terrorism Act to persecute their daughters.
We were really surprised to hear on the 7th of August they were rearrested under counter-terrorism charges under the Terrorism Act and brought to London to Hammersmith Police Station as well as Newbury Police Station. They were held in communicado and in solitary confinement for up to a week without any charges. And then when they were finally charged, it was not to do with the Terrorism Act. All terrorism charges were dropped. And it's been really distressing how the government is using these draconian counter-terror laws to incarcerate the Filton 10, as they're now known.
And what's really been chilling is that although they didn't charge them with terrorism, they charged them with things like criminal damage, as you'd expect. On the charge sheet from the Crown Prosecution Service, it says with terrorist connection. And that has been plaguing them ever since. So every judge that's considered bail has obviously been freaked out by terrorist connection and has refused it. It's also the investigation still being led by counter-terrorist police. And I had, after that initial search by 4 officers, I had 12 counter-terrorism police turn up in a massive van and search my entire home from top to bottom. It's the counter-terrorism thing it extends to everything. So they refuse bail, we think, because of that. In prison, they're given just very severe restrictions that don't apply to any of the other prisoners. So that the 6 women of the 10 who are in Bronzefield have a non-association order on them, which means that they're restricted in their everyday activities. They can't apply to do something that another of the 6 might be doing. And that's affected visits, it's affected accommodation. My daughter was kept in the induction wing where she was unable to make friends for the first 2 months. So it will mean as well that when they're sentenced, they will get longer sentences because of the terrorism connection.
And just to add on to what Claire just said, with the visits as well, because of the non-association order on all of them, if one of them books a visit, none of them is able to book a visit, whereas on remand, they're allowed to have a visit every day at Bronzefield. But because of this, their visits are severely restricted as well.
20 years ago, the 4 Ploughshares women were put on trial in Liverpool. The outlook wasn't good. There had never been an acquittal at a Ploughshares trial, and over the years the movement's activists had received a collective total of 156 years in prison. 4 years earlier, Chris Cole received an 8-month sentence after causing £90,000 worth of damage at another British aerospace plant. It took 2 trials, however, as the jury in the first was hung. The judge instructed the jury to use their conscience, common sense, and common humanity in reaching a verdict, saying that, quote, "If what Mr. Cole says is happening in East Timor, it may amount to genocide, which is a crime under British and international law," end quote. Chris Cole had argued that he had acted with reasonable force to prevent the crime of genocide. The women defended themselves on similar lines. They presented the analogy of a person slashing the tyres of a car. To quote the defence counsel, "Under normal circumstances, that would be a crime. But suppose they knew the car was carrying a bomb which would devastate Manchester city centre. In that case, slashing the tyres would not be a crime. It would be a responsible and public-spirited act." End quote. The defendants coloured in this analogy by calling witnesses from an Indonesian human rights organisation, a political prisoner, and John Pilger, amongst others. They testified to the horrors taking place in East Timor and to the Hawks' role in that. After the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, the judge said he would accept a majority one. 1 hour later, the jury returned to announce, "Not guilty on all charges."
I suppose I tend to be a bit of a pessimist, and when the foreman stood up, I was just thinking, well, I prepared myself for several years in jail, and here it comes, and that's okay, because what we did was right. But then when he said, "not guilty," and there was this huge gasp around the courtroom, and he had 7 different verdicts to read out, because there was 4 criminal damage charges and 3 conspiracy charges. And everyone, I mean, we didn't dare breathe until he actually read out the last one, and then the whole court erupted, and the judge didn't even try to shut people up. I'm still in shock, actually. I can't quite get used to being, sitting here outside in the sunshine, and that we did it. That there was justice. I mean, justice, I think, is not that often done in British courts, and on this occasion it was, and it's tremendous.
It was a day for justice and a day for East Timor.
The political class balked at the verdict. John Pilger writes that, quote, "Alan Clark, who as Defence Minister under Margaret Thatcher approved the biggest sale of hawks to Jakarta, and who had told me that he was curiously not concerned by whether or not British arms killed people, fulminated in his disgust at the verdict. It was almost unprecedented, he said, for a court to excuse such criminal conduct." End quote. Labour MP Bruce George, a member of the Commons Defence Select Committee, said that the women should have found some legitimate way of airing their gripe. John Pilger suggests this might be the first time that opposition to a genocide has been described as a gripe. the media did not cover the trial as it was sub judice. Pilger was cynical of this, observing that the principle is applied selectively. After the verdict, the BBC ignored the evidence presented and repeated the government line that the hawks were not used in East Timor. The Guardian's legal correspondent, Claire Dyer, described the verdict as, quote, "the latest in a catalogue of perverse decisions by juries who sympathise with a stand taken by defendants, despite the strict letter of the law. The 4 Hawk women argued that they had acted to prevent a greater crime, a defence that is intended to cover cases such as committing an assault to stop a burglary." End quote. The 4 ladies responded by saying, quote, "This was not a perverse decision, but one based on law. Is it any less legitimate to use force to prevent murder and genocide? The law is being broken, but not by us. The law against genocide is being broken by British Aerospace, selling hawks to the brutal Indonesian dictatorship." End quote. Fast forwarding to 2017, peace activists Sam Walton and Dan Woodhouse broke into a BAE Systems facility and attempted to disable Typhoon fighter jets, destined for Saudi Arabia. This was at a time when the Saudis were murdering hundreds of thousands of people in Yemen. As an act of continuity, they took one of the hammers the 4 ladies had used with them. In spite, or maybe because of, saying they did not regret taking the action and would do it again in a heartbeat, they were both acquitted in court. Just recently, Angie Selter, now 73 years old, has been arrested in London for protesting the genocide in Gaza. This is the same protest that Jeremy Corbyn was questioned under caution for attending. Thank you for listening. I'll link to various sources in the info box, including a documentary, Seeds of Hope, on the 4 ladies, and Palestine Action, where more information on the Filton 18 can be found. I'll also link to a petition on change.org, which calls on the British government to stop the use of counter-terrorism powers against pro-Palestine activists. It currently has over 43,000 signatories. To finish, I'll play us out with a further clip from Zoe Rogers' mother, where she recites a poem her daughter has written from a British jail cell.
It's called Prison Conversations. When they ask why I did it, I tell them about the children, how their childhood is stolen from them, how their skeletons are left charred and smoking, how easily their bodies are crushed by falling buildings, how their skin melts as their flaming tents collapse around them. I tell them of the boy found carrying his brother's body inside his bloody backpack. I tell them of the girl whose hanging corpse ended at the knees. I tell them of the father holding up his headless toddler. I tell them of the mother who received the approximate weight of her family in body parts to bury as they had all been shattered beyond recognition. Then I tell them about the history, how this has happened time and time again. I tell them about the Stern Gang, the Hilltop Youth, the wars of 48 and 67, Operation Cast Lead and Protective Edge. I explain how they call it mowing the lawn, cleaning the land of these human animals, how they calculate the minimum nutrients to keep everyone alive, chop a bit off and let only that inside. How since the war they've banned chlorine, morphine and children's toys and much more that's needed for people to survive. Finally, I talk about how it was us that started it, with our Balfour Declaration and media suppression. And I say I cannot stand for this. It can go on no longer. So I took action against Elbit, their weapons supplier. But I never forget to say that it was love, not hate, that called me, watching their songs and dances for freedom, reading their hope-filled books, listening to their dreams of being doctors, teachers, journalists, and never giving up.